Hello, everyone, and welcome to Raisina Dialogue 2021. For this very special session, I have with me His Excellency Augusto Santos Silva, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Portugal. And since Portugal is holding the EU presidency, this conversation will be about EU-India, the dialogue between two biggest democracies in the world. Very welcome, sir, and very thankful for having you as part of this conversation.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to participate.
So let me, since we'll be talking about EU and India and the global challenges and global opportunities and global order, let me begin by asking you, a simple question, but I think the most important question that everyone is asking everybody else these days. What is the EU's assessment of the post-COVID-19 global order, how it is evolving? What are some of the lessons that EU has learned from this crisis? And potentially, where do you see the global order going from here, given the complexities that we face today?
Well, I think that the right and honest answer is that we shall need more globalization and more collective consultation, collective effort in some areas. And we shall see less globalization in other areas. May I explain what I do mean by this? Well, I think that we shall need more collective action at the worldwide level in, for instance, our capacity of responding immediately to epidemics and pandemics. This will not be the first pandemic or the last pandemic of this century, and we have to work together in order to strengthen our capacity of responding to such pandemics. And how can we do that? We can do that taking into full account what we mean by the word sustainability, because this is an issue of sustainability. We have to deal with nature, meaning nature, the biodiversity, the oceans and the water supply, and also the biologic nature, animals, viruses, bacteria. We have to deal it in taking into account that we need sustainability to our growth, we need sustainability to our development. So I think we have to reform in depth the World Health Organization, and we need to call on other multilateral platforms and organizations to have a full-fledged capacity of response to these new challenges. And of course, what I'm saying about pandemics, I could say about terrorism, I could say about climate action and other global challenges that the world is facing. So in this sense, more globalization, meaning more collective action and the strengthening of multilateral platforms and of multilateralism as an approach. But less globalization in other areas. And the main area in which I think we are going to evolve towards less globalization is the chain values of what we consider public goods. This was a very impressive lesson that we learned from the early stages of the pandemic. We found, at least we Europeans, we found that we had outsourced more than we had to in terms of our chain value, of our supply of medicines, of medical equipment, and other goods that we consider basic and universal goods. So we are now preparing, in the context of the European Union, what we call a movement of re-industrialization of Europe, in order to control better the value chains of these basic goods. So more globalization in other areas, less globalization in other areas.
Very interesting, His Excellency, because one of the things that we in India saw our political establishment reacting is in very similar ways. One of the first statements and major statements of Indian Prime Minister was early on in this crisis was that India has learned one of the most important lessons in this crisis, that India needs to be self-reliant in some areas, which I think is very similar to what you are describing in terms of supply chains and industrialization. So in that context, there has been a lot of talk about the decline of the global multilateral liberal order. And may I ask you, what role do you see for India and EU-India partnership in crafting some common responses to those challenges that you have just described?
You see, this is the other dimension of the dynamics of globalization as I see it in the next future. And this is the dimension of the players with which you have to deal with, and the partners you need to have as nobody is isolated in the current world. So we have to deal with the common threats and common challenges. One obvious example is terrorism. The other obvious example is the climate change. So we need multilateral platforms in order to address these kind of challenges together, because I do feel that United States, Russia, China, the European Union, India have the same concern in what regards the climate change. So they have to work together. But you have to diversify your partners. The reason why, the main reason why Portugal, as the current presidency of the European Union, decided to organize a meeting between the heads of state and government of Europe and Prime Minister Modi here in Portugal next May, the main reason for doing that is that we think we need to rebalance the geopolitics of the world order. So Europe has not, Europe now, we can see the resumption of the transatlantic bond with new American administration, the kind of ties, so close ties between European Union and United States are obvious and they will be improved. But since the United Kingdom exit from the European Union, we need as well to keep this strong alliance with the United Kingdom. But when we look at Asia, traditionally, European Union looked to Japan and Korea, very important traditional allies of Europe, looked to China, rising power in India, but looked less to India and to Asian countries. And we Portuguese, we think that we have to rebalance this approach. That's why we convened a meeting with India, because it is important that the two biggest democracies in the world, India with, I think, 1.3 billion people, and the European Union with 450 million people, the two biggest democracies in the world, need to have this kind of regular political dialogue. So you see, the other dimension of my approach to globalization is this one. We need to diversify our partnerships. European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, what we call the North Atlantic democracies, need to talk better and to talk more often, of course with Africa, of course with Latin America, but in a very specific way with the Indo-Pacific region, and within the Indo-Pacific region with a country like India.
His Excellency, you talk about geopolitics and you talk of EU's engagement with the larger shifts in the Indo-Pacific. In this context, as European Union looks to emerge as a geopolitical actor in its own right in the Indo-Pacific, Are we seeing greater consensus emerging within European Union about its role there? Because there has been a lot of doubts about that possibility, given the differences of opinion amongst EU member states about the extent of their engagement in the Indo-Pacific and what sort of engagement that might look like. We have seen some countries, for example, coming out with an Indo-Pacific outlook or approach, which have been the national policy documents. And are we looking at the possibility that European Union will be able to achieve a more cohesive outlook on this particular geopolitical issue, which is the most important geopolitical issue of our times?
Well, I would say that let's hope, and it's possible. Diversity is of the essence of the European Union, and we do think that it's one of its richness. We are very diverse in languages, several languages, several nations, several histories and cultures joining together in a political and economic union. The experience of Portugal is very different from the experience of Germany, for instance. And you can see that. You can see that, for instance, in the national policies documents concerning or addressing the Indo-Pacific that you just mentioned. If you read the papers from the Netherlands, from France, and from Germany, you can see the differences. That's why it's so important to have here the kind, I would not say the leadership of Portugal, but the added value of Portugal inside the European Union and the added value of the United Kingdom outside the European Union, but inside Europe. Why? Because, you know, Portugal was the European country that launched that was the first one to launch a maritime road to India through the south of Africa. At the end of the 15th century, Vasco da Gama, and we have this multi-secular relationship with India. United Kingdom, of course, is also a very important partner to India in Europe. Both Portugal within the European Union and United Kingdom outside the European Union add to Europe this maritime dimension, this Atlantic dimension, that in a certain way counterbalances the continental approach led by Germany. When Germany thinks of Asia, normally Germany thinks of trade. When Portugal thinks of Asia, normally the first theme for a Portuguese mindset is geopolitics, and then comes the political relationship and dialogue, and then comes the trade and investment issue, and then comes, of course, the cultural ties and so on. So I think that we will reach a consensus within the European Union, but it is not easy, because the approaches that naturally, logically, different European countries have in what regards India are different. But of these differences, we can build up a common approach, and that's what we are going to do. We are preparing that, and fortunately, or if the process ends well, we shall have conclusions approved by the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the European Union this April, and then the political declaration next May of the meeting between the heads of state and government of the European Union and Prime Minister Modi. So we have to build together this approach to your region, taking into account the main role India has to play in this approach.
His Excellency, related to this question and related to, I think, a lot of the issues that we have just touched upon, is at the center of it all sits the rise of China and all that it means for the world, for countries in the Indo-Pacific, as well as for countries in Europe now. And we have seen, for example, some back and forth in terms of understanding or mapping a new trajectory with China. There have been some concerns with regard to some divisions within the European Union. As you say, it's a conglomeration of various countries with very diverging perspectives. But do you see an evolution in a certain direction in terms of the mapping out of the China challenge or China opportunity, or do you see still that the flux that existed before COVID-19 struck us, that flux still exists? And how does European Union, and especially under your presidency, would like to tackle this question? Because at the heart of a number of these conversations sits this very fundamental question of China. I mean, India is facing that challenge as much as European Union did, but India is one country, and therefore the decisions perhaps are relatively easy. So how do you map that out sitting there in Europe?
I think it's evident that the fact is that there is a certain evolution. And in a certain way, it was expectable. We could expect this kind of evolution. We don't want to replace A for B in our relationship in Asia. It's not an issue of replacing China by A, B, C, or D. No, it's an issue of, it's a topic of multiplying our interlocutors in that region. We have traditionally countries that are very akin to Europe, for instance, New Zealand and Australia, but also Japan or Korea. We have this long-standing relationship with India. For instance, that's the case of Portugal and many other member states of the European Union. We have this fact, the rising influence of China and the challenges it poses. We have the need to understand better what does it mean, the process of a certain kind of multilateral approach protagonized by the member states of the Asian, of the Southeast Asia. But this is we have to look at this with this purpose of multiplying the partnerships and multiplying the relationship, but with certain red lines, the red lines that are in the core of our values and principles. So, being very precise in my answer, in what regards China, of course, we have a very important trade relationship with China. China is one of the major partners of Europe in trade and investment, and I think this will continue. But we have very different approaches in what regards human rights, in what regards political institutions, in what regards political liberties, in what regards use of artificial intelligence for control purposes, first. And second, there are some interests of Europe in the Asian region that have to be preserved. And you know, the first interest is a common interest of all I think the common interest of humanity is the need to preserve the liberty, the freedom of circulation in the seas, the issue of maritime security, the issue of the openness of straits and seas in Asia is an interest that belongs to the international community as such. And we cannot accept any movements of any country that limited or impedes this freedom of maritime navigation.
Thank you, sir. We are running out of time, but before we conclude, because as you had alluded to, the much anticipated summit meeting between Mr. Prime Minister Modi and member states next this May. I would just like you to tell us a bit about the important areas on which you're looking forward. You're looking forward to making some movement on a range of issues. Some of the issues in India-EU relationship have been stuck for a while. Are we going to see some movement on that front? And what are the new issues on the agenda that you, under your presidency, would like to take forward over the next year or so?
When we envisage the outcomes of the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the heads of state and government of Europe next May, we think of three very important outcomes. The first one is the meeting itself, in what it means of political dialogue between India and the European Union. Second, we expect a joint political declaration that is being prepared, and it will be very strong, very assertive. And we expect some guidelines in terms of improving cooperation in several sectors: connectivity, digital, mobility, and of course climate action. So we expect that the leaders can give us, for instance, ministers of foreign affairs, clear guidelines in terms of improving the cooperation, the Indo-European cooperation in these areas. And third, we expect the resumption of the negotiations on trade and investment issues, because they were suspended some years ago, and we need to resume the negotiations towards an agreement that protects geographical indications, an agreement that protects investment, reciprocal investment, and an agreement that facilitates, that fosters trade, the Indo-European trade. So again, we are thinking very practically. And we do think that this summit will be a starting point for further activities, diplomatic, political, and for some improvements of the economic ties between India and Europe. Just think of the pandemic. India is the pharmacy of the world. India has a know-how, a splendid know-how in what concerns medicines and active principles for medicines. We need to cooperate more in that area.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time, His Excellency, and thank you for being with us here today and giving us your valuable time. It has been you have given us some valuable insights into what